Hello everybody, today we're headed towards Devon and Cornwall. I've split this journey into two parts because it's quite a long trip all the way to Penzance. So in this video we'll be going as far as Exeter, and in the second part we'll go to Penzance. Now this is another busy main line which is now fully populated in game. There are at least 8 fast trains an hour headed out on the fast lines towards Reading and beyond, as well as 4 Heathrow Express services which only run on the London part of the line. And then there's an assortment of local trains which run on the other tracks. It's been fairly simple to get the main lines running smoothly here, just because most of the fast trains follow the same stopping pattern on the busy section of track. Almost everything just goes straight through to Reading without stopping, including the train we're following now, and there are only a couple of trains per hour which stop at Slough on the way. I believe that's a bit different in peak time, but since we're trying to simulate a off-peak timetable here, that's not an issue. The only part of the route that tends to get a little bit congested is Reading Station, since there we not only have to deal with these First Great Western fast trains, but also the cross-country trains, which typically reverse there or terminate there as well, but even that's running relatively smoothly now, as you can see. We're following a train from London to Plymouth, and it runs fast from Reading to Westbury, so it doesn't stop at any of the places like Hungerford or Newbury. Now, in addition to talking about the main line today, I wanted to talk about some of the challenges that this part of the world present, and specifically the problem of irregular services. So I've said that this map tries to simulate a typical off-peak hour timetable. That is, it's kind of a snapshot in the life of the railway network. But there are some areas of the network which don't have as much regularity as to make it very easy to do that. Areas where the timetable can vary from hour to hour, where there are kind of occasional extensions to services which add up to a quite strange looking timetable, and just stopping patterns that vary from hour to hour. And given that the timetable on this map is based on regularity, telling a train to go somewhere every hour or something like this every 2 hours, it can be quite difficult to accurately simulate that. Now, the First Great Western and the area that their trains travel in is a part of the country that has a lot of this, as it turns out. So, for example, the services between Reading and Taunton follow all sorts of different stopping patterns which are not necessarily regular. Sometimes the trains terminate at Bedwyn, sometimes at Taunton, sometimes they're extended to Paddington. Sometimes trains to Bristol will go on to Plymouth or Penzance. Trains from Paddington to Plymouth are relatively regular, but the extensions to Penzance vary greatly depending on the time of day. So in order to simulate all this, I've had to simplify things somewhat, so I thought I'd describe how I've gone about doing that. The backbone of this route down to Devon and Cornwall is an hourly service from Paddington to Plymouth, and then once every other hour there's an extension to Penzance. So that's somewhat different to how things function in real life, where the extensions to Penzance sometimes happen every hour, sometimes there is a break for 4 hours, but giving it every other hour, it seems about right given the frequency of the service in real life. So the Penzance service is somewhat faster than the Plymouth. It runs fast from Reading to Taunton without stopping, whereas this Plymouth service that we're following stops at Westbury and Cary along the way. So similarly, the Taunton and Bedwyn services run on alternate hours, and they use the same path on alternate hours. So that means that the likes of Hungerford and Newbury have an hourly service to Paddington. I think that's a slight improvement on the real life service, where they seem to run approximately every 3 hours, but it's easier for the purposes of this map to run them every 2 hours, and the paths seem to be available with a little bit of tinkering. And the Taunton service every 2 hours serves Frome each time, which means Frome has a service every 2 hours to Paddington. And it also means that Cary and Westbury get an hourly service to London, since the Plymouth stops there too. Now what this means is that none of the services are extended to Paddington, which is something which is worse than the real timetable. It seems to be a fairly irregular service, and mostly at peak times anyway, so I'm not too sorry about that. Elsewhere in First Great Western Land, none of the Bristol trains are extended to Weston-super-Mare, as some are in real life. Again, that seems to be mainly a peak time thing, so it doesn't seem to be too big a loss. And also, none of the Bristol trains are extended down to Exeter and beyond, which also sometimes happens in real life. So apart from the mainline services that I've talked about, the other main thing which was difficult and a bit irregular in this part of the world was the Heart of Wessex line, that is, that runs up from Weymouth to Bristol and beyond. Now this is a very irregular service, and the destinations at each end of the line can vary from hour to hour greatly. Sometimes the train runs from Gloucester to Bristol, sometimes all the way from Great Malvern to Weymouth, sometimes from Bristol to Southampton, and there's very little regularity about it, but for the purposes of this map I've had to impose some regularity on it and again simplify the timetable somewhat. So I've made trains run once every 2 hours from Great Malvern to Weymouth, so covering the whole length of the route, and then another train every 2 hours on the same path from Gloucester to Westbury. So what that means is that the central part of that route from Gloucester to Westbury has one train an hour, and then once an hour you have an extension to Great Malvern at one end and to Weymouth at the other end. So again, for some places I think that's a somewhat better service than you get in real life, but it solves the problem of irregularity, and it's quite doable given the state of the paths and the diagrams. It creates one problem though, which is that it eliminates the service entirely at Dilton Marsh station, which relies on trains from slow First Great Western trains from Bristol down to Southampton and beyond. So the Gloucester to Westbury train actually reverses at Dilton Marsh rather than terminating at Westbury for the purposes of giving it some kind of service. I could put in a kind of token service from Westbury to Warminster to deal with that. I may do that as we go. We'll see about that. So the point is that this was all kind of necessary simplification given the limits of Simutrans and the need to impose some kind of regularity on this network. I think the First Great Western network is kind of the main culprit of having this kind of regularity, and that shouldn't be too much of a problem elsewhere on the network. So now arriving in Exeter, where we will leave this train, and then in the next video we'll pick up with the second part of the trip, where we'll follow a train from Exeter to Penzance. So thank you for watching, and I hope you'll tune in for the next part.